the instructions. The problem is, with next Monday being a holiday, I'll probably completely forget. So before I talk about the papers, has anyone thought about being president of BOSS? Because I really need somebody to say, yes, I'm dying to be president of BOSS. Because we need the head of the delegation. We'll keep the state history. If I can find the enrollment sheet. If you become the president, you're not alone, so don't panic. You have each other, you have me. And if you're a minister, you gotta write an opening statement anyway, so. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, are you volunteering? Whoops.
If I'm already a minister, so I mean I can't be president.
No, we'll just make you minister and a boss for now. We can always,
Anybody else want?
well, we can always get somebody else to be the minister.
Okay, I volunteer as tribute.
Swell. Hang on, Mark. And you're Carolyn?
Yes, sir.
Great. So we'll make you president of BOSS. And then you were the economics minister, right?
Correct.
Anybody want to step forward and be the economics minister? Then you won't be alone, you still have me. You'll have president of BOSS. Anybody want to be a volunteer? Don't be shy. You don't have to know a lot about economics. Well, as long as we have a boss, I'll keep pressuring you guys to become economics minister, because we have an environment minister and a human rights minister, but we'll need somebody to be economics. So give it some thought. Thank you for being president of BOSS. I started to talk about what we need to put in the opening statement for the country as a whole. And I do have the papers, but for those of you in the remote sites, if you would send me an email, again, directly to me with your mailing address, I'll just drop it in the mail and send it to you. And we can go from there. Madison, I had a little trouble printing yours out. I finally got it done today, so I'm gonna have to grade it this afternoon, but you can still send a request because I'll get it done this afternoon. I think everybody else I got done in a timely manner. But there was one I wanted to take a look at. It's from our student who's doing this remotely, Kira Steinwand, because of the connection she made between what was happening in Palestine and her situation as a Native American. So normally if in my class, not remote, I ask permission to do this, but I'm just gonna take responsibility because this doesn't mean anything else was wrong, it's just this one struck me particularly. So because she made the parallel between the Palestinian situation and to a great extent the situation of the people that she is associated with. So I found this particularly interesting. And then, as you notice, as always, I make notes about everything, so. So hopefully, we can see this on all the sites. Yeah, so Kara writes in the paragraph here, being a registered Native American of the Seneca Nation of Indians, I have found this Palestinian story very familiar to my ancestral conflict. I have been able to use my displaced roots to help me understand where the Palestinian people are coming from. Palestinians removed from their homeland mirrors that of life for the indigenous on this continent. The story plays out more often than we would like to admit and is only recently understood by those who have lived it. While I'm not old enough to be part of the Indian boarding schools, I'm a direct descendant of those who survived, using force to remove and then continually denying people any rights over their initial land because of an opposing belief. The irony of this class being taught on stolen land, while speaking of the atrocities overseas, only perpetuated the hidden history of the issues within our borders. The U.S. has continuously broken treaties with the indigenous communities for their gain, much like the Zionist rhetoric being propagated in Palestine. This inhuman and subhuman treatment of the original inhabitants of the land is echoed in the lectures. I have gained a deeper understanding of both sides of this story and the lengths a people will go to claim divine rights. So this was one way to answer it, but what struck me about this is she made it very personal, and I really appreciated that she could make the connection between what's happening there and what has and continues to happen here, because that was always part of my goal with the course. Of course, we have to focus on Palestine, but the Palestinian story has parallels in other parts of the world. And so I made a couple of notes, probably can't read my chicken scratch. It says this part is interesting and good. And then my other chicken scratch is both Israel's treatment of Palestinians and American treatment of Native Americans are excellent examples of colonialism. Particularly in the case of Palestine, what we call settler colonialism. So, you know, when I have to read and grade a lot of papers, this one just struck me because it was just more personal and it caught on to the parallel, which is not to say that the rest of you did, because the papers were all different, which is what I enjoyed about them. So I don't know if anybody had a comment or a reaction to this one, but I was grading pretty much most of Friday, part of Saturday, part of Sunday, and I still got to finish today. But when you're doing a lot of them, something unique jumps out right away. I go, wow, this is pretty good. So I don't know if anybody had a question or a comment or a reaction before I do anything else. Sure, President Abbas.
I read a snippet from a book about how the Palestinian and the Israeli people in their schools are taught, and well, essentially the irony of this class being taught on stolen land while speaking of the atrocities overseas only perpetuated the hidden history of issues within our borders. We're not really taught that we're on stolen land at this
You're right.
juncture. In school, we don't talk about that. We say, yes, this is Americans, that, but we don't acknowledge their original sovereignty of the land.
Where did you go to high school?
Allegheny Limestone. So around here, we're near Salamanca, so we know stuff.
Right.
We do learn a lot about
Yeah, I think around here, but especially in Cat County with Salamanca, we're more conscious of the presence of the Seneca Nation. But I would suspect in most of the local high schools in both counties, a lot of that history probably is not taught. It's taught from, the colonialist perspective. Same thing happens over there. The Palestinian schools, they teach that history, and the Israeli schools, they don't. That's why that one book that was trying to parallel was trying to see how both sides take the exact same history and it comes out different. And so I'm not a historian or certainly not anti-history. It's just that, there's that old saying, history is written by the winners. That old saying I remember. And I think that becomes quite true. And so, you're not taught who was here before we got here and how we had to move them away, and in some cases simply kill them. And the same thing happens in Israel. They're not really taught about who was there before their country and what they had to do to get rid of them. So I think, if you're the winner, you learn history from a colonial perspective. And, she saw it from a different perspective being a Native American. And then, of course, the parallels between settler colonialism, the parallels between history not being taught. I think that's why this one just jumped out at me, because it got so personal, which was not a requirement, but, sometimes that's what made these really interesting. Just like somebody said, well, before this class, I never even thought about this stuff. Or I had a distorted version of just constant conflict, and that was fine. So, did you want to say anything else about the history or the lack of history?
No, my point was that it's probably similar to what happens in Palestine and Israel.
Yeah, and I think it is. One major difference is around here, we still use Indian names for things. But half the time, whether it's Chautauqua, Cattaraugus, Seneca Junction, I mean, we could go on and on and on. Cassadaga, I'm just trying to think of all the names around here that are Native American names. We pushed the people aside, but we kept the names. But I think most of the time people aren't even aware that they're Indian words and what they might mean in English. What's really interesting in Palestine is that when the Israelis take over a community, they deliberately take the Palestinian name and get rid of it and change it to an Israeli name written in Hebrew. And so if you had an Israeli map and a Palestinian map, the Israeli map lists all these towns in Hebrew names, and the Palestinian one has them all in Arabic names. And they're exact same places. But the Israeli government has taken it even a step further. We don't even want to be reminded, at least around here, if you're paying attention, you see the name of a place, you go, that looks like an Indian name. You may not be taught that, but at least it's still there. The Israelis just erased everything, got rid of the Arabic names and turned it into a Hebrew name. I mean, how much further can you go to erase and make people invisible? You get rid of the names, you build these walls, you restrict their movement. It's really still quite disturbing to me, obviously. So I don't know if anybody else had a comment or a question. I mean, the injustice of the situation is horrible. Let me give out the papers here in Jamestown. And then again, if you send me an email with your US mailing address, I'll pop this in. If anybody here has a question about your paper, you can certainly ask it in the group. And then if you want to meet with me after class, we can. Or you can come see me this afternoon after 1:30. I should be in my office until my next meeting with students at 5, so I'm around. And then, of course, the next thing we got to move on quickly, and I'll be talking with President Abbas. We got to move on this opening statement. So let's see, Olivia Brooks. Why do I always think you're Olivia and not her?
I don't know.
I know you're Cassie. How did I learn that? Anna Scholl. An amazing spirit.
Yep.
Why do I want to think you're Olivia?
I don't know.
My mind works in mysterious ways.
Thank you.
And the less we know about how my mind works, the better. So, President Abbas, I think we want to have a draft ready for the Wednesday, a week from Wednesday. It's the Wednesday we get back from the small break. And then if you could send it to me as an attachment to an email in time for me to get it for class. And then we'll put it up here and we'll work on it all together. And I would do the same thing with the other ministers. So again, you're not alone. We're all going to work together. So if we can get yours started, we can move a whole lot faster on the others, because the others will have to get into specific issues. And all I did with that little overview on Friday when I showed you the EU, the DPRK, and us, our general opening statement, of course, deals with demanding statehood. And one of my suggestions would be that, and I left the notes from that, but they were kind of cryptic in my other folder. But the other thing I would add is I think we got to say that this whole mess, although we'll be more sophisticated about it, is predicated on all the Zionist errors baked into the Balfour Declaration. So you remember when we went over the Balfour Declaration, we spotted all the problems, at least I think from a Palestinian perspective. And so in the opening statement, after the few opening things that you have there, from that sheet that we looked at on Friday, is I think we want to get into Balfour. And, you know, we can blame our lack of a nation state and the injustice done to us on the Balfour Declaration. So we want to point out all the errors that we pointed out in class. So, you know, it would be, this is what started the mess, because I noticed that some of your papers, you were asking, well, how do we get out of this? And that made me think, because we're all trying to aim towards an eventual policy statement or treaty about how we do end this. But I think, and this is subject to the discussion, I think we got to date it to the Balfour Declaration. And just say fundamental Zionist mistakes were made in this document, and until we correct those, there's no hope of moving forward. So we would incorporate a statement, and then we would talk about what's wrong. Because I think, you know, when we go back to that other paper about the history not being taught, lots of people read the Balfour Declaration in international relations classes. But I'm not sure they're always critiquing it. And I think, you know, certainly I'm not sure they're critiquing it from the perspective of the Palestinians. So sometimes people want to argue that all of this trouble started with the end of World War II. And I'm not sure that's true. I think all that trouble that started at the end of World War II, when it switched from the British to the Americans under President Truman, was still based on fundamental mistakes made in that Balfour Declaration. And you know, when I watch what people are talking about, you know, in the real world, I never see people taking us back to that, or I do occasionally if it's a Palestinian. But I think since we're the Palestinians, we got to bring it up. So if you can have a draft ready, and I'm sure your classmate there in Olean would be delighted to help you, wouldn't you?
I would love to.
See, I knew she would. You're such nice people. Yeah, because we're not. Say what?
How long are we looking to make the opening statement?
That's a great question. part of me says until it's complete, which is of no help to you at all. I think to do what we did on the stuff on Friday, and then adding the Balfour, and then the analysis and how that's what started all this trouble, it's got to be a page and a half double-spaced type, wouldn't you think, or at least 2?
Oh, yeah, at least.
Yeah, and the specificity of ours will be that Balfour Declaration and also that repetition of land, people without a land for a land without people, which is one of the quotes we want to bake in there too. So your welcoming will be pleasant, but then you'll get to the heart of the matter and say, we got to correct this, and we got to correct it now, or there's no hope for any future peace. Yes.
Is that approximate length also for the ministries or?
Yeah, I mean, the ministries are going to have to sort of repeat the theme, but then we got to get into the substance of the issues. And yeah, so now if you're a minister and you want to start writing your draft, that's perfectly okay. Only that we got to get into the substance of the issues. And for that, you follow the guidelines of those questions that Dr. Kaufman puts at the end of the piece. So, and again, you're not alone. We'll keep working through stuff. When I think about, say, the trade or economics ministry, and I have something here to share with you. The position of the Palestinian people was that there was prosperity until the 1940s. We weren't rich, but we weren't poor. And then the problem of settler colonialism the last 70 years is what's destroyed our economy. So if we can back up and redo and get rid of the premises of the Balfour Declaration so that we're an independent nation state, then we can move ahead. But until that is hanging around our neck, how can we possibly proceed? Everything we trade has to go through Israel. We can't make trade agreements. We can't open our airport. They took away our right to have a port in the Gaza Strip. I mean, how are you supposed to build an economy when the impediment of not being an independent nation state stands in our way? So that's why even in the economics one, you repeat that. Just thinking off the top of my head, even though we still need to have an economics ministry. But there is no, you could say peace through prosperity, but in our case, there's no prosperity until there is peace. And there can't be any peace until we undo the Balfour Declaration. So go back to your question. Now, you're one of the ministers, but you're not economics, right?
Yeah, the environment.
Oh, you're the environment minister. Okay. Yeah. Well, I think, again, if you don't have the simulation packet, request it from me ASAP, because to do the opening statements for the ministries, you're going to have to deal with not only those questions, but some of the specific things that Joyce brings up. And then I haven't had even a chance to look at what she says about the situation in Palestine as of June. But there's always so many directions to go to. I come in every morning thinking, well, which direction do I go now? But we've got to concentrate on the simulation. And again, for us, going back to President Abbas, the ultimate result by the end of the simulation is to come up with a proposal for the proposal center based on this concept, getting the countries in the negotiations to buy into an independent nation state. So that's our long range goal. But can't do proper trading without that. I don't think we can do much about the climate. And then, of course, human rights, the movements of people. Who's our human rights minister? Yeah. That one's loaded with possibilities because of all the restrictions put on labor. And that's not going to go away until we get an independent nation state. So, it's a complex problem. If you look at England leaving the EU, supposedly by the end of this year when they negotiate a trade deal, they're basically saying, well, we want to control our borders. We don't want to let other people in unless we want to let them in, not the EU. And that's certainly one way to look at it. I want to keep other people out. In our case, as Palestinians, we're tired of being kept in, and somebody brought that up. So we don't have the freedom of movement. And I think, the EU would respond to that because freedom of movement is one of the principles they're based on. So I think I answered your question. So again, for my two ministers here, climate and human rights, feel free to start working on an opening statement, but get a little more into the weeds. You still follow the lead of President Abbas about how we don't have an independent nation state and all our usual stuff, and then you can get into the issues. And then we can talk about those.
And then will those be like due by for class?
Well, I want President Abbas to have it done by Wednesday. If we could have even a rough opening statement from the ministers by Friday. Because, we need time to work on them. And again, I'll share with the class and we'll talk about it. And don't forget, next week, you don't have classes on Monday and Tuesday.
And then how are we to get in touch with our ministries? Are you still going to send out that email or?
Good question. So let's see, you're in human rights, right?
Yes.
If you have like Facebook or something, you can add me to message me about that.
I don't have Facebook.
Or phone numbers still.
So I have Olivia's in the ministry.
Yeah, and I thought somebody else.
Yeah, and then Tanisha from Olean.
Okay.
So what I can do for the ministries is, if no one objects, share your email with each other.
Yeah, that's fine. I can still be my
Or just put all your email out there and say, remind you who's connected to whom. Yeah, yes.
We could just open up a discussion on Blackboard and anyone can add to it whenever they needed to.
I don't want to get into Blackboard. If you guys want to do that, because it just adds another layer to me, and I don't need to be part of the discussion. So if you wanted to open up a Blackboard discussion, and if you wanted to, that would be fine. I'll still share the email.
Yeah.
Unless you object.
I don't care.
Yeah, but if the ministers want to open a Blackboard discussion, go for it. I just don't want to. It just literally creates another layer of me things to check, and with everything I'm doing, it becomes very difficult. I'm not a big Blackboard fan, but that's my problem. I mean, it can train me to do this, but. I'll just get it.
I don't know if we can open a discussion ourselves.
You can't, the students?
We can send like emails to each other from Blackboard, but not like a discussion board.
See, that's what bothers me. If it's for students, why can't you guys do it? I need to keep that free because something else I gotta do later in the semester. That I have to go into that one. I mean, if I created it, but a discussion board for the different ministries, or, see, because I don't even know if I go in there, if I can only do it for the class as a whole. I just don't know.
I think you can create like on the side where like it says home announcements, YouTube live videos, you can just put in another thing that has discussion board. And then under that, put in each one for human rights, environment, and then.
Well, let me check into that, because I have no idea how to do that. That's my problem.
If you don't want to do that, you could make a Google Doc and then you
Yeah.
would have to.
Well, but you guys could create a Google document, right?
Yes.
Yes.
We would just need each other's emails.
Yeah, so what I'm gonna do is I'll still share the emails. You wanna create a Google Doc, that's fine, but every time, but here's the problem, I have trouble printing out Google Docs. So they have so many firewalls in this place. That's part of the problem, so I think it's great if you wanna do a Google Doc, but then when you get the rough draft, still send it to me just as an attachment to the email, if you would, or here, you can just hand it to me.
Mhm.
But I made a note that I'll share the emails, I'll look into the Blackboard discussion, and then you guys can do the Google Doc without me. besides the Google company is evil, hesitate to give them any support. They have all that fancy lunch food and games to play in their office headquarters, but like 3/4 of Google employees are not employees. They don't have benefits. They're all independent contractors. Which means no health insurance, no retirement plan. Just, it's not a good way to go. Anything else on that, now that I denounced Google? But feel free to use it. Everybody thinks they're copacetic? Yes.
So with the simulation, we'll get all this submitted because it starts in March, correct?
Right.
And then it runs for 5 weeks. So what are we going to be doing during that 5 weeks? Are we going to be reading and like answering?
Well, we'll be negotiating with the other countries.
Oh.
So once opening statements start showing up, we have to identify who's our ally, who might be our enemies, who can we contact to move ahead on different issues. We can ask for support of our position. After we read their opening statements, we can ask questions about it.
Oh, okay. So we'll be.
There'll be
asking
some
and answering.
discussion, and then at some point, there's the pre and post summits when all the delegations are online at the same time. The only problem with those is they're not in ordinary class time. So typically, and we're on 3 different sites, but we have 3 issues. So when they do the pre-summits, which I think are an hour, I forget, depending on what the issue is, because it'll be one of the substantive issues, I try to be on the campus at that time of the group that's involved. So sometimes I start moving around between Olean, Dunkirk, and Jamestown. And then at the very end, there's the post-summits, again, not in regular class time. Now, I can't require you to go to stuff outside of class, but I urge you to either go to it or you can access these things from a remote site. So let's say you have to be home or wherever you are, you can do it from any place.
Okay.
I try to be on campus with whatever students can show up because I have 3 locations. And then we usually reserve, like in this campus, I reserve the social science lab. In Olean, I reserve a lab over in the tech building. I actually have never done it in Dunkirk, but they'll be back and forth and we'll still be doing our stuff too.
Okay.
And you'll get the sign-on information and the password, and we'll take a tour here in class because we'll pull it up and we'll look at it. Joyce hasn't sent any of that out yet.
Okay.
Any other questions? I think we're okay. So after I assigned you that paper about what is Palestine and who are the Palestinians, and I asked you to reflect on what you understood perhaps before you got to the class and what you were thinking about since you joined the class. And before I do that, did anybody here want to ask anything about the papers I gave back, including if you couldn't read my cryptic notes? Because sometimes I'm writing too quickly, or sometimes I underline stuff with a question mark. You can also meet with me after class and meet with me after lunch. But no questions. And you guys haven't gotten yours yet. So since I asked you to do that assignment, I started thinking about myself and thought to myself, well, I divide my understanding of Palestine pre-going to study there and post, having returned. And, when I reflect on my own understanding before I started doing the reading and then going over there, my knowledge of Palestine wasn't that strong either. I mean, I knew of the place. I knew a lot of the biblical stuff because I was raised as a Catholic kid and didn't see public school until graduate school. And so my understanding was certainly incomplete, full of holes, and best mildly sympathetic to the Israeli Zionist side, because that's the way it's constantly presented, at least in the United States. And so I went back and looked at my world politics textbook that I use in world politics, and I went in the index and I just looked up Palestine. And there's a very short section, there's a map in there that's not bad, but there's a very short section that basically talks about terrorist activities on the part of the Palestinians against the Israelis. And so if you just went by what was in that textbook, you would come away with basically no understanding of Palestine. You would come away with an understanding that there's always in war, which is not really the case, although there's unfortunately lately, for 70 years, violent conflicts. And you would come away with sympathy for Israel with absolutely no discussion of what was going on the Palestinian side. So if I were to write what I just asked you to write, that's the way I would describe it. My knowledge was incomplete and was probably mildly sympathetic to Israel. And I had some understanding of Zionism, but not as complete as I do now. And part of that is tainted by what I talked about before, that if you show any sympathy for Palestine, you're automatically denounced as being anti-Semitic. And my own personal experience has been that's exactly what's happened. I get attacked for being anti-Semitic, so, which I like to think I'm not. So my own understanding was weak. And even in my world politics class, we didn't spend a lot of time on it. What finally changed my perception was the 2 months of reading I had to do before I went there, and then especially when I got there. When I was doing all the reading that was required of us, it was like being in a graduate course. And I think I've talked about this before. I remember getting upset, distressed, shocked. Shocked in part because why didn't I know about this? Especially since, the United States is the #1 ally of Israel. And then shocked at the horrors of it and thinking, why are we people talking about how people were being treated? And I remember that 2-month period, all I did was go teach my classes and go back to my office and keep reading. There was that much material. And then I talked to you about how they said, well, don't bring any of that with you because they find it in your luggage, they're not going to let you in. And I thought, well, this is horrible. And then the story about the kids' books and everything else. So and then the security conference. But even while I was doing the reading, I had to stop and go for a walk on campus because I was getting so upset. And so I think I told you how I felt I was going into the world's biggest outdoor prison, which is the title of one of the books that's been written. And then after spending my time there, with the way the rules are never really the rules, and they always change, and you don't get an explanation, and it's unpredictable, and then warning me that my passport as an American won't do me any good. And then I'm thinking, this isn't a prison, it's an insane asylum. Because if you ever read about insane asylums or see movies or anything, it's always about how the rules are always changing. And the question becomes, who's crazier, the inmates or the keepers? And then you start wondering about the effect on the keepers. For example, I used to teach in prison all the time. I used to teach in Attica, which of course is a max security facility. I would always joke with students that I used to be in jail, but to teach. And I remember going into the prisons and to teach the inmates. And especially in Attica, I was told, you have to go through checkpoints, and the walls of Attica look like the walls in Palestine, only as a friend of mine pointed out, the walls of Attica are actually lower. I think this is absurd. The walls in Attica are lower than the walls that the Israelis put up. But it looks almost the same. And I was told that when I was in the prison, to obey the rules of the guard no matter what. Just, if I have a complaint, to take care of it later. But while I was there, to obey the rules. So I did. But, the school was way in the back, so I had to go through checkpoints. And I often got stopped at checkpoints. especially if the prison suddenly went down on lockdown. And, you know, there are guys in there who are murderers and rapists. I mean, pretty serious stuff. So that there'd be me, the teacher, the bookish guy with a bunch of books, you know, 30 inmates, some of whom are probably very dangerous, and one guard with a nightstick. And I kept thinking, well, if something happens, they're gonna go after him first, and then maybe me second. But, you know, you start to think about that stuff. And the only parallel I ever found to that horrific situation was when I went back to Palestine. And I was told if I'm in the lockdown with the guys, or if I see the guys, who are my students, I was not allowed to say hello to them until I was in the school. So, like, I just saw you in your office this morning, or I see some of you walking around campus. It would be as if we had a rule that I can't talk to you, which would really bother me, because if I recognize you, which sometimes is a problem, I say good morning, or hey, what are you doing, what are you up to? In the prison, they became invisible. Even if and some of the students were excellent, by the way. I would have an excellent student, I just did his paper, I couldn't say, hey, nice job. I was told to treat them as if they weren't there. And again, that started to make me think about Palestine. You know, this whole idea that you make people invisible and then it's okay to do anything you want. Now, I never witnessed anybody getting hurt, although I've been around when it got locked down because there were many brawls. When I went into Palestine, I got the same feeling I used to get when I went into prison. The difference was I'd go and teach a class and get out at the end of the night. You know, Palestine, I didn't get out at the end of the night. I just stayed, and I had the same feeling. And so my eyes were opened in such a way that they can never be closed, and I keep looking for parallels. And I was actually even thinking about that before I fell asleep. So I thought, well, if I give you an assignment, I should talk about how this affected me. So there are lots of people in the United States who are Palestinian and non-Palestinian who are trying to change all this. It's a struggle, but one of the things I brought with me today, and we'll just go over it very quickly, and then we can actually use this. Oh, there's that damn shadow again. I think we can at least go through the top one. And don't worry about taking notes from this. It's actually the other side that's even better. This is written by a group of Americans, which includes Palestinians and non-Palestinians, who basically are trying to call attention to what's going on there and calling for justice. So you can see the title of this document is Freedom is the Future. Feel free to steal that for our opening statements. I kind of like that. A vision of justice from Palestinians in the US. Palestinians in the United States declare that freedom is the future. What follows is a vision of justice grounded in Palestinian demands for freedom and self-determination, our right to return to our homeland, the space to thrive, and our right to resist for the better world we know is possible, which relates to all the issues in the negotiation. There is a global divide between those who believe in freedom and dignity for all and those who justify oppression and supremacy. Palestinians struggle for freedom from Israel's daily violence against our people and ongoing settler colonization of our land is part of a universal struggle for collective liberation. So you'll notice that this attempts, kind of like with the student talking about what was going on with Native Americans, they're trying to connect the issue of Palestinian freedom, making it more than just a Palestinian issue. This is a universal issue. This is for all people who feel like they're oppressed, whether it's Native Americans or whoever it might be. And again, this is good, and we can use this tone. Our work for freedom is rooted in the lessons of our elders. Sounds very much like a Native American approach to care for the earth. I mean, elders caring for the earth sounds like Native Americans to me. Our people and our heritage. We will not give in to injustice. We will not be erased. Now, the tone of this is so good that we can use pieces of it reflected in our opening statements. For my friends on the other campuses, when you request your paper, I'll throw a copy of this in. And for my friends here in Jamestown, I'll just eventually get you one. And I'm just making a note to myself. And the other side gets very specific, but this just sets the general tone. Zionism, the political ideology that drives Israel's oppression of Palestinians, is a form of supremacy and is inherently anti-Palestinian. Israel denies us basic rights and pushes us off our land to maintain a state that privileges one people over another. Israel shares strategies with the U.S.'s own settler colonial violence against indigenous people, as well as the U.S. war against the foreign oppressed. So again, when your classmate who was online talked about how this is very similar to what's been done to us, turn it into what my goal with this class was, to teach about Palestine, but talk about how this is a universal issue. In clear example, the U.S. and Israeli government conduct joint police and military exchanges where worst practices are shared. Israeli tactics informed U.S. repression of the Ferguson uprising, you might remember that in Missouri, and Standing Rock water protectors, which involves Native Americans protesting against a pipeline. Our struggles are unique, but we are all fighting for a better world. It's long past time to divest from oppression and invest in our communities. In the U.S., we should invest in healthcare for all, equal access to education, a healthier environment to ensure we have a future worth fighting for, instead of using our tax dollars to prop up imperialism and violence around the globe. The U.S. government uses taxpayer funds, $3.8 billion annually, to bolster Israel's military, making us complicit in Israel's violence. We Palestinians in the U.S. are forced to fund our own oppression. We demand that the U.S. immediately end all military funding to Israel and other forms of military, economic, and diplomatic support until Israel upholds the rights of Palestinians and our vision of justice. We uplift the following demands of our people across the globe for full justice. And then on the other side, they get much more specific, and it can help us draft our opening statements. And as I said, I'll get this to everybody, but feel free to use this tone, even some of this language, to make our problem in Palestine, because in the negotiations we are Palestine, and make it more universal. But this isn't just about us. This is about a worldwide problem. So with that, I will stop, and I will see you on Swell Wednesday, right? So, and if anybody wants to talk about their chapter, happy to. I'm still touching the screen. It's not. Proud I can get it.